I kind of realized how powerful Tupac and I was. You know what I'm saying? Because we two individual people, we waged a coastal beef.
These weren't the words of a rapper bragging about his achievements. They were the voice of a man sitting down to face himself just 1 week before he was murdered. In his final interview before leaving this world, the notorious B.I.G. broke his silence for the first time. He mentioned names that were never written into thank you notes, never appeared in backstage photos, and were never forgiven. 10 rappers, 10 conflicts, 10 wounds Biggie carried with him until the very end. And for the first and only time, he said their names, not to restart a war, but to close a chapter that had never been ended. So, who did Biggie truly despise? Who left a mark so deep that a legend held onto it in silence until his final breath? Are you ready to see the list? Tupac Shakur. When brotherhood became a bloody legacy, Biggie didn't read that list with a tone of hatred. They were just names that reopened old wounds. And at the very top of that list was the man who had once been his best friend, Tupac Shakur. And from there, every tragedy began. They were once two young men, one from the damp streets of New York, the other from sun-drenched California. Two flames, one from Brooklyn, one from Oakland, met in a small kitchen, filled with the smell of steak laughter and cheap plastic Kool-Aid cups. Tupac cooked. Biggie laughed, talked about music dreams, and changing the world with rap. No cameras, no stages. Just two 22-year-olds who believed rap was a place to speak your truth, not a place to kill. But that genuine friendship, born in an era of chaos, fame, and stray bullets, would become the first tragedy Biggie carried to his grave. On November 30, 1994, at Quad Recording Studios, a familiar building in Times Square, Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times in the lobby. He walked into the studio expecting to meet a friend and ended up bleeding before even reaching the stairs. Upstairs, Biggie was reportedly recording along with familiar faces from Junior Mafia. Lil Cease, Biggie's closest protege, was the one who had called Tupac there. That chain of events made it impossible for Tupac not to question things. And for him, the answer came down to one word: betrayal. Biggie later denied everything. He said he didn't know Tupac was coming, that he was shocked and panicked when he heard the gunshots. But all of that came too late at a time when the media was bloodthirsty and trust had already shattered. While Tupac lay in the hospital, later convicted and sent to prison for a separate charge, his world began to close in. And behind bars, he heard the chilling beat of "Who Shot Ya?", a track Biggie released just weeks after the shooting. Though Biggie insisted the song had been recorded long before and wasn't aimed at Tupac at all, for a man who had narrowly escaped death, the timing was a mental dagger. From that moment, Tupac chose a different path: aggressive, direct, defiant. He signed with Death Row, released Hit 'Em Up, the most vicious diss track in rap history, attacking not only Biggie, but his wife, Faith Evans. Every bar tore apart any chance of reconciliation, turning their conflict into more than personal. It became a symbol of the East versus West war. Biggie stayed silent. He didn't answer. With diss tracks, didn't retaliate on radio. But those close to him said he was hurting. And maybe that pain, buried unspoken, haunted Biggie the most. A week before his death, in a rare interview, Biggie spoke of Tupac not with bitterness, but with a strange calm. Tupac wasn't just my rival. He was a part of me. It was the moment Biggie realized their feud, born of misunderstanding, had spun far beyond their control. It was no longer about two men, but about a society where fame, trust, and culture were torn apart by commercialization and pride. That conflict killed them both, physically for Tupac and spiritually for Biggie, before real bullets found him a few months later. If anything remains after all of this, it isn't hatred, it's remembrance. That in a world where every bar can turn into a bullet, trust is the most fragile thing of all. And sometimes, the thing we come to hate most is what we once loved the most. Nays, the silent war between two kings. If Tupac hurt Biggie with a betrayal that struck straight from the heart, Nas unsettled him in a different way, quietly, silently, and without bloodshed. But it was that very silence that made the wounds harder to soothe. In a city like New York, where every rapper was chasing an invisible throne, Biggie and Nas were the banners of two opposing approaches. One stood for raw street breath, the other for transforming rap into an artistic empire. And when those energies collided, no bullets were needed, only absence. From the early days, Biggie held a deep respect for Nas. He once said, "Illmatic is the only album I ever bought with my own money from the store." To him, Nas was the poet of the streets, someone who could do things even Biggie silently admired. But that relationship never truly found its voice. They didn't talk much. They didn't share studio time. And when a chance finally came, a remix for Gimme the Loot, Nas didn't show up. One missed session could be forgiven. Two understood. But three. In New York's music scene, that's a silent rejection. Insiders say Biggie felt disrespected. And what stung most wasn't the missing track, but the missing respect. He never addressed it publicly. But on Kickin' the Door, he rapped, "Your reign on the top was short, like leprechauns." To casual listeners, it might have sounded like wordplay. But in hip-hop, where every metaphor has an address, everyone knew that was aimed at Nas. As for Nas, he didn't entirely deny it. In one interview, he said, "Big and I had our tense moments." He admitted there was competition, even discomfort, when Ready to Die and Illmatic were compared. One featured a black child staring forward. The other was Nas's own childhood photo. As the similarities became a topic of discussion, Nas once said, "I saw it as a quiet challenge. But I understood that's New York. That's an artist's fire." They never attacked each other directly. But that caution only turned their relationship into a long chess game. Biggie watched Nas as a rival, a brother he envied, yet couldn't help but admire. And Nas, from a distance, kept his space not out of contempt, but to protect his own light. In a city that only had room for one king, sometimes the other could only exist as silent insecurity. Maybe what cut Biggie the deepest wasn't open hostility, but being ignored by someone he once saw as a potential ally. Because there's nothing more isolating than having those most like you turn away. So what truly caused the rift between these two great artists? Pride-style differences? Or simply the fate of two stars on a collision course? And did they ever want to reconnect, but found it too late to say so? KRS-One, when Biggie challenged a monument. In the world of hip-hop, there are names that need no introduction. Just saying them is enough to invoke legacy. For the Bronx, that name is KRS-One. One of the greatest thinkers in late 80s and 90s rap, he wasn't just a rapper. He was an educator, a messenger of knowledge, black identity, and dignity through music. For Biggie, that was a hard image to stand beside a towering figure of moral philosophy. While he, Christopher Wallace, was rising by telling raw tales of violence, dollar bills, and street life. So when in an early 1995 interview, Biggie bluntly said, "I don't like KRS anymore. He thinks he's too good." His ego killed him. The statement wasn't just a personal jab, it was a symbolic challenge, the successor denying the forefather. And in the New York hip-hop scene, especially among the Bronx community, that wasn't something to take lightly. DJ Kenny Parker, KRS-One's younger brother and trusted DJ, recalled that as soon as the interview was published, the whispers began circulating on street corners. Many in the underground felt Biggie had crossed a line by daring to take aim at someone who had guarded the gates of hip-hop for nearly a decade. Talks of handling the situation started surfacing. The Bronx doesn't easily forgive disrespect, especially when it comes from a rapper rising through an entirely different path. Commercial hits flashy singles Versace and Champagne. But things didn't escalate. Because one night, Biggie happened to run into Kenny Parker at a Manhattan club. No bodyguards, no cameras. Just the truth, and the need to make things right. Biggie walked up, shook his hand, and said quietly, "I was wrong. I was talking nonsense while drunk. I never meant to disrespect KRS." It was one of the rare moments in his career where Biggie admitted fault head-on. Kenny believed him and passed the message along to KRS, quietly extinguishing a fire before it caught flame. But the deeper question remains, why did Biggie, who rarely took personal shots, choose KRS for that remark? Did he feel judged? That his style of music wasn't conscious enough, not political enough? Or more deeply, was he pushing back against the expectations placed on black rappers to be preachers, role models, instead of just storytellers of their own reality? That incident, seemingly small, reveals something larger. The boundary between rap's elder statesmen and rising stars has never been clear. And when old-school values like Bronx pride and street knowledge are replaced by wealth and stage noise, conflict is inevitable. So did Biggie truly hate KRS? Or was it his way of smashing the plaster statue he was being forced to worship? And more importantly, in a culture that demands rappers keep it real, is there space for regret and misunderstood intentions to be forgiven? DJ Quick, the ghost of the final night. Not every conflict needs words. Some names live in memory, not because they said something wrong, but because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. And on one fateful night. For Biggie, DJ Quick was one of those names, not exactly an enemy, but a shadow that can't be erased from the backdrop of his final tragedy. Quick, real name David Blake, was one of the veteran producers of the West Coast. He represented the signature G-Funk sound of California and had worked with many of Death Row's major artists. During the peak of tension between the coasts, anyone connected to Suge Knight, the ruthless mogul behind Death Row, was automatically viewed with suspicion by the opposing side. Quick never publicly spoke out against Biggie, but his silence, and more crucially, his unexpected presence in Los Angeles on the night Biggie was killed, became a stain too blurred to ignore. On the night of March 8, 1997, after attending a Vibe magazine party at the Peterson Automotive Museum, Biggie was shot 4 times while his SUV sat at a red light. A professional hit clean swift and leaving no trace. Shortly after, Keith D., a former Compton gangster and a witness at the party, recounted in an interview that he saw DJ Quick standing outside with DJ Theo and a group of men allegedly connected to the Bloods gang. According to Keith D., their presence wasn't random. More importantly, they stood there like they knew what was about to happen. No one ever claimed Quick pulled the trigger. No one had hard evidence linking him directly. But for someone like Biggie living in a world where neutrality didn't exist, Quick's presence that night was enough to mark him as someone not to be trusted. As for Quick, he's always remained silent about the incident. No strong denial, no attempt to clear his name. That silence only fueled the questions. What did Quick know that night? Was he just a coincidence in the wrong place? Or was his presence a signal of deeper connections only insiders understood? For Biggie, this wasn't about rap anymore. It wasn't about lyrical battles or billboard positions. It was about survival, about darkness closing in, about the creeping sense of being surrounded by faces he couldn't read. If Tupac was betrayal with a name, then Quick was nameless threat, the kind that made Biggie feel unsafe even at the height of his fame. Biggie's murder remains officially unsolved, but among the dozens of names surrounding him on that final night, DJ Quick is one of the very few that made witnesses stop and say, "I can't be sure, but I think he knew." So in a culture where music and violence intertwine, is silence innocent? And in an era where you're judged not just by what you say, but by who stands beside you, is there still a line between a true enemy and the ghost of suspicion? Wu-Tang Clan, a front line within New York. When people mention Wu-Tang Clan, they often think of an independent artistic fortress. 9 individuals, 9 voices forming a whole new school in the midst of an increasingly commercialized hip-hop scene. To Biggie, Wu-Tang weren't chart rivals. They were a challenge at home, a group that embodied the authentic side of New York he knew intimately, but also felt alienated from. There was no public war of words, no direct diss tracks between Biggie and Wu-Tang Clan. But the tension between these two rap powerhouses in mid-90s New York was palpable, unspoken, smoldering thick in the air. That tension didn't stem from personal hatred, but from a fundamental difference in how they defined the realness of rap and who truly held the city's crown. The name mentioned most in this divide was Raekwon. In the 1995 track Criminology released with Ghostface, Killa Ray didn't aim directly at Biggie, but the lyrics cut like blades. "You be killin' numbs in your rhymes, but your style is moist." That line paired with the cover of Only Built for Cuban Links, showing the two rappers masked like real-life mafia, was taken in underground circles as a bold declaration. We're the ones truly killing this game. At the time, Biggie was skyrocketing with singles like Juicy and Big Papa, and it was impossible for him not to see it as a shot at his credibility. He never fired back publicly. But in Puff Daddy's Victory, released in 1998, after Biggie's death, his verse returned with imagery-heavy bars using Wu-Tang's own symbolic language, only to flip it with mockery and dominance. It wasn't a lyrical gunshot, it was an image takeover. A way for Biggie to say, "I can do what you do, but make the world listen." What's more telling, though, is Wu-Tang's silence. They never referred to Biggie as an enemy. RZA, the group's sonic architect, said in a later interview, "Biggie was a monster. But we were on two different paths." And maybe that parallel movement without intersection is what kept both sides viewing each other as powers to be watched carefully. For Biggie, Wu-Tang was a difficult equation, an artistic symbol he respected, but also a reminder of the street essence some believed he lost in fame. And in a city like New York, where rap power isn't handed down but seized being challenged from within his own home, Turf made the wound cut deeper. Not through words, but through a sense of legitimacy, being quietly questioned. So did Wu-Tang truly hate Biggie? Or was it the fact that they never saw him as one of us, that more than anything else left Biggie feeling hurt? Jeru, the Damaja, a strike at the heart of the bad boy aesthetic. Not everyone who took aim at Biggie said his name. Some attacks were embedded in the lyrics, not fired directly at an individual, but sharp enough that anyone wearing the metaphorical jacket would instantly feel the blade. For Jeru the Damaja, a Brooklyn MC with a deeply underground spirit rap was a weapon meant to purify hip-hop. And in his eyes, Biggie had become the clearest symbol of the luxury creeping into street-rooted music. In 1994, Jeru released the track, One Day a piece heavy with criticism. In it, he condemned rappers being controlled by corporate powers behind the scenes, men in suits, smoking cigars, counting money on the backs of artists. No names were mentioned, but the imagery of flashy suits, champagne, and Versace outfits on MTV led many to think of Bad Boy, the label that was actively pushing Biggie as the face of luxury rap. DJ Premier, who produced the track and was a close friend of both Jeru and Biggie, later recalled that Big came to see him, not angry, but with a quiet, pointed stare. "Yo, son, you really roll with them. I can see whose side you're on." A line from Biggie's later track, Kick in the Door, Son. "I'm surprised you run with them" is widely seen as his cold response aimed at both Premier and Jeru. No names needed. Biggie returned the slight with a lyrical slice as sharp as a razor. But behind that response was a deeper hurt Biggie never voiced. He didn't mind being dissed. What stung was being seen as someone who had sold out the streets for the spotlight. For someone like Biggie, who took pride in his Brooklyn roots, who used to roam the blocks with rhyme books in his coat pocket, being labeled a commercial rapper felt like an insult to his artistic identity. And that pain cut deeper coming from a fellow New Yorker, someone who had once shared the same voice of the streets. As for Jeru, he never publicly said, "I hate Biggie." He simply stated, "I speak on what I see." And if someone feels hit, it's because it touched something real. To him, hip-hop was a tool for awakening, not wealth. But the question lingers, did that purity unintentionally leave behind artists like Biggie? Those who had to survive before they could preserve the art. The question still stands. If Biggie and Jeru had ever sat at the same table, had an honest conversation about what the streets and success truly meant, could they have avoided that quiet disdain? Or was the philosophical divide, one seeing rap as doctrine, the other as salvation, too wide for them to ever walk the same path? E40, from a 0 rating to a near assassination. Some conflicts start with just a few lines in an interview, seemingly harmless, but spreading like wildfire, especially within the volatile context of 1990s hip-hop. The rift between Biggie Smalls and E40 began that way, a comment in a Canadian interview, a short score 0. And what followed was a chain reaction that pushed the boundary toward life and death. E40, born Earl Stevens, is a Bay Area legend, a pioneer of Northern California's musical identity, with a vocabulary-heavy style and complex rhythmic structures. By the mid-90s, he had platinum plaques, a loyal West Coast fanbase, and firm respect in the community. But to Biggie, who was then riding the peak of his career under Bad Boy, E40 didn't seem to leave much of an impression. When asked to rate West Coast rappers, Biggie bluntly gave E40 a score of 0. It's unclear whether Biggie said that out of personal bias, musical taste, or simply because E40's sound didn't resonate with him. But for E40, that number wasn't just a personal insult, it felt like a slap in the face to an entire region often overlooked by mainstream media. And in hip-hop, where geography can shape identity, disrespecting a coast can quickly evolve into a confrontation with deadly consequences. Not long after something strange happened, Biggie was booked to perform at a show in Sacramento. But this wasn't just another gig. According to both E40 and others close to the event, the show was actually a setup. A group of young men in E40's extended circle, what he later called My Little Hyenas, had orchestrated the event with the intent of teaching Big a lesson. That night, E40 received a chilling phone call. "We got Biggie here. You want us to handle it?" That moment, as E40 recalled years later in an interview, was a turning point. He chose not to escalate. He told them to stand down to cancel the plan and to let Big leave Sacramento safely. He admitted, "I didn't set that show up. But yeah, my people were looking at him." Although nothing violent happened for Biggie, it was a stark wake-up call. Careless words in hip-hop can lead to unforeseen consequences, and not everyone gets as lucky as he did that night. There's a small but telling detail. In the liner notes of Life After Death, released in 1997, just days after Biggie's murder, E40's name appears quietly, a subtle thank you. No explanation, no grand gesture, just a name tucked in the list of acknowledgments. It revealed Biggie's understanding of how serious the situation had been, and his awareness that some people who once stood on the edge ultimately chose not to pull the trigger. E40 never responded with a diss track. But from this incident came a bigger question. In an art form where anything can be clipped, headlined, and magnified, do rappers still have the right to critique each other without risking their lives? And if a single zero could nearly get a man killed, where do we draw the line between speaking your mind and suffering the consequences? Suge Knight, the invisible hand behind every tragedy. Not every name on Biggie's list of adversaries was a rapper. Some didn't hold a mic or write lyrics, yet they determined the fate of an entire coast. Marion Suge Knight, the mogul behind Death Row Records, was one of those figures. With his towering build, dark sunglasses, and a powerful artist ecosystem, including Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac Sugo, was more than a music producer. He was a symbol of power, and also a persistent threat Biggie never dared to speak of aloud. Unlike personal or artistic disputes, the tension between Biggie and Sugo was a conflict rooted in systems, a quiet clash between two empire models. Suga didn't hate Biggie for his music. He hated what Biggie represented bad boy entertainment Puff Daddy and the dominance of New York at a time when hip-hop was entering globalization. To challenge that force, he chose Tupac, a symbol quick to ignite, easy to push into confrontation. The moment Suge truly entered the battle was at the 1995 Source Awards. On stage in the heart of New York, he provocatively declared, "If your rapper doesn't want the producer all up in the videos dancing, come to Death Row." The message was clearly aimed at Puff Daddy, Biggie's partner in every musical product. But when an artist's entire ecosystem is insulted, the pain doesn't just land on the manager. Biggie didn't respond publicly. He stayed silent, but retreated with heightened caution. From that moment, every trip to Los Angeles came with bodyguards and hotel switches. At one point, he told someone close to him, "Out there, I'm not just a rapper, I'm a target." That feeling didn't stem from lyrics, but from a looming darkness beyond words, a force that orchestrated media lawyers, record deals, and personal vendettas like Suge Knight. People may debate Suge's exact role in the conflicts that led to the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, but no one denies this. He helped turn the East-West tension into a political front, where artists were no longer individuals, but manipulated symbols. For Biggie, the most terrifying thing wasn't threats. It was the knowledge that every small move, from music choices to party appearances, could be seen as a declaration of war. Suge never pulled a trigger, but he changed how the gun was loaded in hip-hop. And for Biggie, a man who still wanted to believe music could be separate from gangs and politics, that was a wound impossible to define, but one that always festered beneath the skin. By now, the question isn't, how much did Biggie hate Suge, but rather, could an artist like Biggie ever truly exist and thrive in a system where power didn't lie in lyrics, but in the black limousines parked next to a contract? Tim Dog, the one who triggered the F. Compton curse. Before Tupac was shot, before Suge Knight walked on stage at the 1995 Source Awards, and before Biggie released Juicy, the East-West picture of hip-hop had already begun to crack. Many believe the war between the coasts started from personal disputes, but in truth, the first seed of cultural conflict was planted by a lesser-mentioned figure, Tim Dog. In 1991, Tim Dog, a rapper from the Bronx, released a ruthless diss track called Phi Compton. The song opened with gunshots and blatant insults aimed at Dr. Dre, DJ Quick, and even rising West Coast icons like NWA. With its harsh tone and direct aggression, Phi Compton wasn't just a provocative record, it was a match thrown directly onto the fault line between two cultural spheres, one few paid attention to at the time, but that would erupt violently just a few years later. At that moment, Biggie wasn't famous yet. He was still Christopher Wallace, a young rapper from Brooklyn just beginning to record early demos. But even in those early days, Biggie's music was deeply shaped by the atmosphere Phi Compton helped create. It was an air of hatred, regional prejudice, and the growing belief that New York rappers, the original founders of hip-hop's foundation, were being eclipsed by the fame and softening influence of the West. There's no evidence that Biggie ever mentioned Tim Dog by name, but in later interviews he often voiced his frustration at how the media favored West Coast rappers, while New York artists had to fight to get recognition. In one 1995 interview, when asked about the East-West rivalry, Biggie replied simply, "I didn't start this, but somebody opened their mouth first. No one asked who somebody was, because everyone already knew." Tim Dog wasn't a lasting figure in the music industry, at least not commercially. But his cultural impact was something else entirely. He did what no one dared to do. In the early 90s, he turned regional tension into the language of rap. Whether intentional or not, that act laid the groundwork for a divided mindset that Biggie and Tupac would later be unable to escape. To Biggie, Tim Dog's existence served as a sad reminder that one song, one idea, one burst of cultural arrogance, if timed just right, could become the excuse for battles no one ever truly wanted. And in a world where music always carries a message, those who spark the flames rarely stick around to see how far the fire spreads. So what exactly did Biggie resent about Tim Dog? The lyrics themselves, or the deeper truth that even a single song, good or bad, could destabilize an entire culture? And more importantly, if Phi Compton had never existed, would New York and Los Angeles still have walked into a decade of hostility? Or would it have all remained just a game of music? Junior MAFIA, The Wound from Behind. Among all the names that ever caused Biggie Smalls pain, there was one he never put into lyrics, never uttered on radio, and never called out in a diss track. And perhaps because of that silence, it became the deepest cut. It didn't come from a rival on the other coast, not from the press or a stage. It came from those who had walked the same path as him, shared the same meals, slept in the same studio, and vowed to protect each other on every beat. Junior MAFIA. Biggie wasn't just the frontman of the group, he was the founder, the glue that held together Lil Cease, Lil Kim Chico Del Vec, and the young faces from Bedford-Stuyvesant. He brought them from the streets of Brooklyn to national stages. The group's 1995 album Conspiracy quickly went gold with hits like Player's Anthem and Get Money. But the most valuable thing they had wasn't sales. It was the brotherhood formed by those who had crawled out of the same alleyways. And then came November 30th, 1994, in the cold hallway of Quad Recording Studios, the moment that trust began to crack. That evening, Tupac received a call from Lil Cease, Biggie's closest protege, inviting him to the studio to drop a verse. Upstairs, Biggie and a few Junior MAFIA members were said to be working with rapper Lil Sean. But minutes after Tupac entered the building, he was ambushed and shot 5 times in the lobby. Bleeding, he dragged himself upstairs and saw the faces of Cease of Biggie of the people he once called friends. I saw those faces. Surprised, scared, but also like they knew, Tupac later recalled. Biggie swore he had no idea what was about to happen, and Cease denied any involvement, but Tupac didn't believe them. And in that look, pain turned into hate. Yet few noticed that the same moment split Biggie's heart in two as well. Even as he continued to deny any involvement, Biggie never dismissed the suspicion. In one of his final interviews, he quietly admitted, "I get why Pac felt that way. That situation had too many coincidences. And when you've lived in this world long enough, you know, coincidences aren't always innocent." Maybe a small part of Biggie asked himself, did someone in his family know something? Did Cease, the kid he once brought to record his first bars, keep something hidden? And if it were true, would Biggie forgive or carry that silent doubt to his grave? He never said. But after that night, Junior MAFIA's future work slowly lost Biggie's spiritual leadership. He still showed up, still supported, but like a father slowly stepping off the stage, not because his mission was complete, but because his heart was no longer whole enough to hold that role. And so it ended, not with a gunshot, not with a diss track, but with the scariest silence when you're no longer sure who you're really walking beside. In Biggie's world, sometimes the worst pain isn't betrayal. It's never knowing whether you were actually betrayed. So if trust is the rarest currency in hip-hop, a world of metaphors, studios, and facades, then who will protect it when the person closest to you might be the biggest crack in your foundation? Before becoming a legend, Biggie Smalls was just a man trying to stay real in a world full of illusions. The list of 10 names he carried like open wounds wasn't meant to curse anyone, but to remind us that trust, friendship, and honor, once lost, leave behind voids no music can fill.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on the screen.